Okay, let's get started. I'm going to just start by reading Derrick's bio, and then we'll jump right into the conversation. This will be a somewhat abbreviated version, but still, I think, pretty comprehensive. Derrick Adams is a New York-based artist whose critically admired work spans painting, collage, sculpture, performance, video, and sound installations. His multidisciplinary practice engages the ways in which individuals' ideals, aspirations, and persona become attached to specific objects, colors, textures, symbols, and ideologies. His work probes the influence of popular culture on the formation of self-image and the relationship between man and monument as they coexist and embody one another. Adams is also deeply immersed in questions of how Black experiences intersect with art history, American iconography, and consumerism. Most notably, in his floater series, he portrays Black people at leisure, posting and respite itself is a political act when embraced by Black communities. The radicality of this position has materialized in Adams' work across his deconstruction worker, figure in the urban landscape, and Beauty World series. So, Derrick, there's so much more that I could read on your bio, and I know you've heard your bio 1,000 times. And so, rather than you know, reading to you what you've already heard, I want to just jump right in and thank you for joining us today, and just kind of give you a moment to just say hello to everyone.
Hello, everyone.
And I've known you for many years, and I've had the privilege of having several conversations with you in that time and working with you on some pretty significant projects. Most notably, you and I collaborated on your 2018 solo exhibition at the Museum of Arts and Design in New York City, Derrick Adams Sanctuary, which was inspired by the Green Book. Of course, that show continues to have a life and travels, and we'll talk about that some more today. But I wanted to just kind of, start this conversation off with with going back in time a bit. I think most of our conversations, at least recently, have been about the work that you're doing today and about the future. But I want to kind of go back in time a bit and talk about your early influences. You're from Baltimore and you have a significant project going on in Baltimore now. Can you share a little bit about like growing up in Baltimore and also about the new project that you're working on there?
Well, Baltimore, is a place that's very special to me as a city. I moved to New York in '93 to attend Pratt. And my reason for moving to New York was not just because New York is a great place, but the lack of opportunity for an artist in Baltimore at that particular time. Fast forward till today, there has been much more opportunity for artists within this global culture to be represented worldwide and still live in Baltimore City or still have a home base. And so I'm really interested in taking advantage of this moment by creating spaces in Baltimore, or at least I'm focused on creating a particular space, which is called the Last Resort Artist Retreat, which is primarily a space that will be dedicated to the health and wellness of Black creatives living in Baltimore and abroad. And the residency is going to focus on sessions relating to meditation, yoga, financial advisors, life coaching, things that I feel is really essential to the development of creativity and things that come from it. And the reason why I'm focusing more on this in Baltimore and focusing on the audience of Black Baltimore is because Baltimore is primarily, the demographics of the city is primarily Black. More than 80% or more of the citizens in the city. But there's not necessarily a bigger opportunity for the creative people in Baltimore, who are mostly from working class background, to really think about a creative career or create a career in a creative space. And so even with that in mind, it's a lot of stress that goes with just being a person who considers themselves a creative person and getting the support for being that. And I understand that completely, because I'm from, a working class family, very supportive of me as, as an artist. I have a lot of creative people in my family. So I never had any particular issues with the support of being a creative person in a non-creative environment or so-called working class city. But I know there's some levels of challenges that come with being from a city that is focused more on the day-to-day than what could happen through the creative exchange. So I decided 3 years ago to make a space in Baltimore that is focused primarily on developing and fostering and supporting the Black community, and also educating them about the benefits of buying property in the inner city that right now is relatively inexpensive, and staying in your hometown and developing your craft in your hometown and taking advantage of the benefits of real estate to get a studio and do those things that I feel are essential, because I left not because I wanted to be in New York necessarily, it's because there was no opportunity in Baltimore for me. So that led me to New York. So as an artist living here now for so many years, I've just started to become more reacquainted with my hometown and showing support by creating this space that will hopefully bring people to Baltimore from New York and around the world, but also bring allies, who believe in what this mission is, and to be able to share in some of the benefits of this space, not only for the Black community at large, but also communities that feel it is essential to kind of the balance of progress to support these people in these communities in order to help them, get on their feet and to establish themselves in a way that they can support the community like I'm doing.
Yeah, I mean, well, thanks for sharing that. It's interesting because your studio now is in Brooklyn. I mean, you're right on the cusp of Bed-Stuy, sort of like Crown Heights, Bed-Stuy, like right there, and that's where I grew up. Like your studio is on a street that I probably passed in my lifetime countless. I mean, maybe 10,000, 20,000 times in my life, because I used to live over there, for decades.
Yeah.
And so now, being in Brooklyn now, I mean, not so much about like how Brooklyn has changed, because we all know that Brooklyn has changed, but it seems to me, in the time that I've known you, that Brooklyn is also, the community in Brooklyn has also played a role in how you think about your work, and it's reflective in your work. And I've seen you do some interesting projects in Brooklyn. Most notably, or recently, there's one with the Long Island Railroad where you did a sort of mosaic there. Can you talk about some of the community related art projects you've worked on?
Well, the thing is about living in New York and Brooklyn, particularly, I've learned so much about community here. I'm more so about the creative community here and the power of the creative community in this particular place. And that the creative community in New York, beyond the idea of commerce, and more so within the Black community here, have really essentially have founded this particular area of Brooklyn, Crown Heights, Bed-Stuy, Fort Greene. I was here in the 90s. I saw things happening here that did not represent anything to dealing with commercial exchange. I experienced artists doing things in their warehouse, artists doing even fashion presentations on the street, doing things in warehouse spaces where they had live performances, just in commercial spaces that they just activated. And I also saw the support of that here, more so than what I was accustomed to growing up in Baltimore, where there were opportunities where artists tried to do those types of things, but really didn't have the overall support. And New York is just such a pioneer when it comes to understanding the importance of creativity, and that creatives are basically the forefront of cultural production. And they actually create a system that really leads development, that leads the way that people think about the value of themselves and their community and property. And a lot of the things that has happened to me in New York, living in Brooklyn primarily, has been really pioneered by Black artists, Black musicians and writers, and things that have led to, how we look at Brooklyn now, how we think about Brooklyn now, the way we think Brooklyn is cool and the way we think Brooklyn is so significant in the whole scope of the world is established mostly by the Black creatives here in Brooklyn. You know, they were doing these things in Brooklyn from the 90s, from my experience of witnessing it, when there was no money, there was no support, there were no collectors, there were no benefactors. People just did stuff in the street wherever they could do it. And Baltimore, again, in other cities like Baltimore, have tried to do those things, but the hustle and bustle of survival in these cities have not really lend itself to really understanding how important on the long term of supporting the creative community would somehow benefit the community overall, and even in the future, you know, of the value system, the idea of people thinking of how significant it is to support creative energy, creative output, you know. And so I kind of been taking this stuff back to my city of Baltimore, because I look at Baltimore as a creative city because that's my experience in Baltimore. But I know that the financial structure that I've established in New York is very beneficial to what I'm doing in Baltimore and how I'm bringing that commerce, you know, that I'm making as an artist into the city of Baltimore to establish this community, the residency community, and other things I'm doing as well. You know, being on the board at the UB Blake Cultural Arts Center in Baltimore and helping to organize some exhibitions there and funding the exhibitions that are at this nonprofit space for a lot of young creatives there. Like, I'm trying to figure out all the things that I've learned in New York, how to kind of bring it back to Baltimore, and also show artists in Baltimore that this is, you know, this is definitely doable, you know, on if we really think about the long game, you know, the future of Baltimore as a city, like for us to invest. And people are doing it. It's not like I'm the only person. Like, there's a lot of younger writers, artists who are actually supporting other writer, artists, musicians. And I'm just, you know, at a place that I can offer my support and also offer my experience in developing this retreat that will somehow kind of balance out what I feel has been a very uneven structure of supporting creative people of color in Baltimore. You know, there's always been places that include artists of color, but they're never the they're never the majority, even though it's a majority Black city. But normally when there's an artist residency or something that's a writer's workshop or residency, normally, you know, in the city that's primarily Black, you know, it may be one or two Black people within a pool of 25, 30 people in the city in a residency or in a space where, you know, you look around outside of the residency, the community, you know, circling the space is not necessarily reflective of who's actually in the residency or in the space. And I wanted to really change that, because not that those spaces are not significant in what they do, but there's no reason for a city that has such a huge population of Black American or Black people not to have a primary space that focuses on the history and the relevance of what's happening in Baltimore over the years, and also keeping that history and moving forward to the future and establishing that. So I've been really focusing on that as one of my, I feel like it's my artwork right now. Like, one of the things that I'm thinking is, to me, I feel like it's an art piece, you know, and I'm kind of thinking about it in a way that will somehow educate me and help me to kind of take on a different position as an artist, but also show other artists that, you know, this is something that can just be contagious within the community, that I'm doing it, you can do it, we all can do it.
Right.
You know, it's not something I'm trying to be a pioneer at, or it's not like a legacy thing that I want to be known for doing. I actually want it to be more about the people and less about me as the initiator.
No, I totally get that. And, you know, it's funny, I wanted to, you know, also ask about a little bit about the curatorial work you've done in the past, because I think it kind of connects to what you're saying about collaboration, empowering other artists. Like, you know, one of the ways that I really, you know, began to sort of become aware of you was, you know, not only just as an artist, but also you were running the Rush Arts Gallery in Chelsea many years ago.
Yeah.
And I think that like that feels like a lifetime ago, I'm sure. But I'm sure there was some interesting lessons that came out of that in terms of being in that sort of like administrative role, and how that's kind of, I'm curious, like, do you feel like that's informed you in any way as an artist, like having been on that side of things?
I mean, it definitely created a certain sense of humility in a way, because as a curator of a nonprofit organization, you kind of remove the idea of commerce out of the equation. So it's really more about the way that you kind of engage with the artist and the way you engage with the audience. Because working in a nonprofit is not like you're going to make a lot of money. So you really have to like what you're doing. You really have to like the exchange of being around people, talking about the art, and also not selling it necessarily. Although some artists, when I was running the gallery in the late 90s to mid 2000s, the nonprofit space was the only really real space for Black artists to exhibit their art. So there was interest in selling art at that time, but there was no audience to buy art. So it's just, although there's a lot of visibility right now with Black artists in the art world, it hasn't been that long since it was not. And
Right.
the artists that we both know, who are now very internationally known, who I've exhibited when I ran the gallery, that I showed multiple times before anything happened for
Right.
them moving forward.
Right.
So it's really interesting for me as I mature to look and witness the evolution of the way things are moving forward, but knowing that not that long ago, it was very, very different. And for me, as a director of Rush Arts Gallery, I was less of a curator, even though that was my role, curatorial director. I felt like I was more of a facilitator.
Mm.
And as an artist and as a practicing artist, I kind of knew what artists needed and what they wanted. So I don't think it was that difficult for me to assist in the development and the exposure and the production and promotion of exhibition, because it was really more like I was making what I wanted to happen for someone else. So it was never necessarily about not understanding what the end product was. It was really more about, I'm an artist, I know what I would want to have if I wanted to have a presentation of my work. So I'm going to work hard to make sure that this artist get exactly what I would want for myself with this space. So it was a lot of hard work because we had very limited budget, but it required like a lot of time. But I learned a lot just about how to be an artist and what to expect and what to not expect, and how to negotiate, and things that I feel now is really part of my daily operation as a person. Like when I'm dealing with galleries and museums and things, I'm very patient with understanding where they are, understanding
Right.
things that other artists may not necessarily understand because they don't understand the inner working of what's going
Right.
on.
Right.
There's a lot of principles that are so essential to establishing installations and like dates, and there's so much stuff going on behind the scenes that artists may not know, but because I did it, I kind of understand what the challenges could be.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I think that like what I think was like really valuable in that experience for you is just sort of like knowing that the art is the center of it all for sure, but there's so many pieces of the puzzle in order for an exhibition to come into existence that you can oftentimes you can tell the difference between someone who knows that and someone who just thinks it's all just like a snap of a finger.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a lot of moving parts, and I think that's like, for me, as I'm not an artist, but like as a curator, when people ask me questions like, how do you feel about artists curating shows? I think like that's, to me, it's fantastic because you learn so much about what actually is required to pull all of those pieces of the puzzle together, that it actually changes the way you might even approach doing a show as an artist once you've been on the other side of things. Like,
Yeah.
that those deadlines really matter. You know.
I mean, to know, I think you learn as an artist when you take on the responsibility of an organizer or a curator, what it really takes to put together a show and how temperamental artists are, and how how it is to, you know, to like an artwork and like an artist. I mean, like an artwork and like and want to work and may not want to work with like the artist. You know, you might, you know, it might be a particular type of work you really like and an artist that you read about and you think they're amazing, and then you propose the show and they accept it, and then you start working with them and you hate them, and you know, the show is scheduled, is booked, you gotta do the work, you gotta do the show, you just do it. You realize that, you know, it's it's now really more, the idea of art is much more business centric,
Right.
but when I was doing what I was doing, it was really more about like, okay, there may be artists that are difficult to be around. There's certain artists who are just not social. There's certain artists who just can't be in the gallery. They just can't be around people. But the work is really good, you know,
Right.
and the work is strong and people should see the work. Maybe I don't want to see the artist once the show opens, but I wanted people to see the work. So I think that that part has changed a lot because artists have to be way more professional now and way more visible when their work is shown. And that to me was adjusting as a as a as an artist, because when I was running the gallery, a lot of artists um, didn't want to have artist talks, you know, because you know, I personally didn't think that there, a lot of the artists were at a place where talking about their art in an artist talk was beneficial. I think, you know, there's certain things I felt, you know, they hadn't had an experience yet to have like an expansive conversation about their work. But
Right. Right.
it's a thing that artists, regardless of having one show or two show, they want to talk. They want to talk about their work. So there's like a whole other thing that's happening with art, like framing your work and framing the context of your work is so much more important for artists now, even though they're still learning about what their work is even about. It's so much part of the culture that we're in now, which is just shift. It's not a good or bad thing, but running a gallery at a time where things were being formed, it was a certain level of excitement because I was learning, the artists were learning, you know, curators were learning, you know, it was a whole community of younger people together. And we showed not only, you know, our focus was primarily artists of African descent, but we also showed artists of other cultural backgrounds. We kind of mixed it up and made like a really interesting exhibition. But the key point of our nonprofit at the time was artists who were kind of on the outlines of the traditional art practice. So that was kind of like the kind of defining principle for selection. So the artists who were doing more experimental things,
Right.
things that were not necessarily considered the traditional commercial space that other galleries or other institutions occupy. So I learned a lot about it as an artist as I was making my work, and it really taught me how to be the artist that I am now, and how to deal with people, how to deal with deadlines, how to communicate. Communicate. I feel like communication was the biggest takeaway of my experience there. Is how to communicate. A lot of times artists may say their work is about one thing or say that they're trying to communicate something, but it may be the opposite. And when you work as a facilitator and you're making art, you start to understand like clarity. You start to
Right.
understand competence.
Right.
Things that, you know, some people may have a feeling that they are being competent or being clear, but until you really work on the other side and understand like what that is to make something and be able to talk about it and also connect it to other people besides people that you're friends with and people that you're in your circle of friends or community, then I think that that is always going to be the challenge for any artist. If you're not
Right.
able to make those connections, then you have to. It's not about explaining your work. It's about being vulnerable to talk about the things that inspire you along the way to create this work. And it could be things that are formal. It doesn't have to be about personal experience. It could be about the way that you constructed it. But the idea of talking about the work is so essential because now we're dealing with the explosion of art in the art world and so many people making art. And so many people are proclaimed artists. And now people don't even have to go to school anymore to get a gallery. So now we have people who are going to get a master's degree. Then we got people who went to undergrad somewhere, and now they're in a gallery. So now, the whole idea of like, why to be an institution if you are getting shows already and you're just doing work. I personally think going to college for art as an artist is very important, because art is not just about making art and selling art. It's about being able to speak about your practice, and not from a personal perspective about your work is because of, sometimes with your grandparents or your family. Like, I don't really care about that. For me, it's really more about being able to talk about your work in a way that is beyond just the personal and more into intellectual side of what your work is about. Where is it coming from? And those things, to me, I feel like are so essential to really understanding the canon of art and what it does. And I think that it's also essential for people to get a higher education in art. Like, people are buying houses, people are buying cars. Why aren't they investing? Why not invest the same amount of money for this car you're going to buy or this trip you're buying into your future? Because art is just not about making art. It's about having conversation with people who are not your friends about ideas. Your friends are always going to point you in the right direction, that is the right direction they think you want to be in. But when you go into an institution like a grad program or art program, you're dealing with people who may not necessarily care about what you're doing, care about what your work. You got, this is the art world.
Right.
You're actually engaging with the real art world when you go to art school. These are the people who are going to be working at the institution that you're going to be showing at or want to show at. These are not going to be the people who are coming into the small galleries and buying your painting, or or buying off Instagram. Like, that's a totally different thing. Like, as an artist, I teach, and I don't have to teach, but I like teaching. It's not about the money. It's about the idea of the privilege of being able to have an experience and then take that experience to an institution and also educate other people about the benefits of having conversations about art that, that are essential. And I always laugh because I have this thing where, and I tell people all the time, is that sometimes I'm at a bar after opening, whatever, and I always find these young artists who come and like want to hang out with me or talk to me about art. But some of these artists, don't go to art school. They don't want to. They don't care about art school. But they want to talk to a person who actually went to art school. They want to talk to a person who has a master's degree in art, who teaches in art college, but they don't want to go to school. And I would say to them, I'm not talking to you because you're jumping the line. I'd rather talk to someone who is as equally invested in the idea of putting money into education as I am, because that's what I went to school for, in order to actually foster those types of individuals to help push them along. I don't feel like you getting insider trading information from me without doing what I've done, to me, is cheating. And honestly, I don't really offer that information that easily, because information is essential. So I believe in institution. I believe in an art institution. I think it's essential. And I think that artists should go to school for art. And I think they should go to grad school for art, because that's the only way you can actually teach, if you decide to teach art, is having a master's degree.
Well, listen, that's real. That's what they say. That's real talk, and I appreciate your honesty and forthrightness on that point. I actually want to switch up gears here a bit. We have some work that we can show and talk about. When I was reading your bio, there's actually a sentence I kind of tripped over. So I'm going to state this sentence again, because it's one of the first works we'll look at. Most notably, in his Floater series, he portrays Black people at leisure, positing that respite itself is a political act when embraced by Black communities. I wanted to get that sentence out properly. Just so I can sleep tonight.
Yeah.
And also one more thing I want to say, there's a quote that I came across. I think it was on one of your gallery's websites, a quote from you that I found to be like really great. And I want to say that before we show the images. So the quote is from Derrick Adams. It says, I feel more than ever that it is essential for artists to make work that celebrates Black culture. As a Black man, I'm aware of my vulnerability and susceptibility to trauma and oppression on a daily basis. There are images that are less important for us to see than images of joy. And I think that's it's a really, really great quote there. So let's see. Are you able to see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful, wonderful. So why don't we start off by talking about this series here, which is something that, I think really was like a big sort of like, I wouldn't say moment, but I think this was like a profound time in your career when you start developing this floater series.
I mean, I started this series in 2015, and it, I'm always interested in, going again, having experience of, looking at our history, looking at images of portraiture. As an artist, you're always thinking about how can I revisit this very traditional subject of portraiture and representation and do something interesting with it. And so I became very much focused on the relationship to the Black figure in popular culture and what would be the best representation of seeing the Black figure in space and what would they be doing that's not leaning more to the traditional odalisque or all those other tropes and all those other references to art history, which are so much used in art from multiple artists from multiple cultural backgrounds, where Western art becomes the major reference, even in a space of conflict. So I'm always thinking about how not to use things that are so tied to Western ideas in art. Not that Western ideas are not influential to me as an artist, but I'm also interested in how the same way that European artists have leaned towards other non-Western cultures for inspiration, I'm also leaning to non-Western cultures for inspiration, And so for me, looking at the Black figure and thinking about how to represent it in a way that I feel as a contemporary person, I started to think about, popular culture and entertainment and commerce. Commerce has always been a very important way I think about identity in America. The imagery of Black people in the past has always been somehow fused with objects that are sellable, from cereal boxes, rice boxes, so things that America has never had a problem with seeing Black figures on things. It's just that having Black figures being able to own those things too has been the issue, or to enjoy those things has always been the conflict in America. So the idea of Black people in commerce, to me, is part of so much of American culture that you really can't have it without it. When you think about sneakers, when you think about things that are just, but there's also things that are not the obvious, like you think about the GPS system. A Black woman invented that, a technology person. There's things that are so embedded in Black culture and American culture that people really can't even dissect it because it's so embedded and so interwoven. So for me, the floater became such an exciting thing to incorporate to present the Black figure and his idea of leisure. Because historically, a lot of the trauma that is associated with Black culture and Black people has always been this idea of looking at Black people trying to live normative life experiences, and is this disrupted by somebody who just don't want us to do that. A Black family having a barbecue. Someone comes over here, why are you here? Why are you barbecuing? Someone's in their car. Why are you in your car? Why, things that are not even about like any kind of crazy disruption. A lot of things that are happening that people just can't wrap their head around is that this person is minding their business. People are in their bed sleep and things are happening to them. So for me, the idea of leisure in the Black subject to me is so radical, because a lot of things that happen, to Black people have usually happened during times where they're at a place of not expecting it, not thinking that these things are going to happen. But moving forward in my work, I don't try to really, I don't think my work can actually capture all of that. Like I'm just an artist making my work, trying to represent ideas of American culture through a perspective of Black experience. So these particular images you're showing are images of people I know, family members, they're from photographic imagery that I had taken of family in pools, in a family pool. So these images are not in any way attached to trauma. These images are really more about these moments that I just felt were so important to capture in art and to present it as a work of art, and really to focus on the formal aspect of what I'm thinking of when I think about my work and when I think about the representation of the Black figure in art and what I want to see in art. So I'm always thinking about, what do you want to see, Derrick? What do you want to walk into your studio when you turn on the lights and see on the walls in your studio? Do you want to see images of oppression? Do you want to see images of trauma, of torture, of injustice? Or do you want to open your studio and feel whole and feel empowered and bringing things into your studio that make you understand the value of Black culture and its contributions to the world? So as an artist, you have the ability to do that. You have the ability to make what you want. You have the ability to craft your reality. And that reality, even if it's fantasy, can become a real reality to people through the imagination of the artist. So I think about that in my practice.
And so we're showing some images now from a fairly recent museum exhibition, and maybe you could share a little bit about these works.
So this is an installation shot from my install at the Hudson River Museum that kind of that opened, was it 2020?
Yeah, 2020.
And what was really interesting about this about the train station.
So good.
Exhibition, this is called We Party and Plan. What was really important about this particular body of work, although it has a kind of celebratory feel, my thing was really driving home is that certain communities not only have events where they are having a celebratory happening, they also are talking about things that are essentially happening in the world. And they could be things that are political, they could be things that are essential in the community. You know, a lot of times the festive events also act as a kind of an event to talk about things that are really important in the community to address. So the idea of partying and planning to me has been always a very common thing for me in my life, in my family, and my friends. And so when I thought about this exhibition, I thought about having this space where people can also enjoy this kind of very vibrant, visible display of celebration, but also keep in mind that, you know, this things that are happening in this space that are really also about making things happen. And so some of the figures in these collages, you know, everyone's not smiling at the party. People, you know, people are festive and they're coming to the party, but there are people who are in deep thought. There are people who are in deep conversation. There's expressions that are mixed on some of the faces of some of the participants, these party goers. So I want to really show that in the work, kind of juxtaposed with all of the other stuff happening around them, still show the broad exchange of expressions happening in this party, even with the party hats on their heads. So that whole exhibition was really about kind of talking about the frequency of being in a space where it's about celebration, but it's also about problem solving. It's also about things that deal with planning and structuring.
Thank you. So this is something I think that's fairly recent.
Yes, it is open last week at Lungladi Foundation in Shanghai. And this is a show with 3 artists, myself, Von Span, and Amawako Boako. The show opened this week. This is a private collection space where the owners of the space collect from artists and they exhibit it. So it's kind of like a personal museum space. And so I was excited to exhibit works that they have in the collection, but also I was commissioned to make a new work for the show. And this is actually a work that was commissioned for the show.
Fantastic. Fantastic. So this is an interesting image, because I hadn't seen this prior to today, actually, and I was curious about it. I mean, where is this, first of all?
Well, that particular piece is called Jacob's Ladder, and it was both first commissioned by the Peabody Essex Museum in Salem, and it was a show that accompanied the Jacob Lawrence Struggle series that's traveling. And so part of the exhibition was a collection of the works from that series, but also commissioned artists were invited to respond to the exhibition by making a piece. And so for my contribution, I was privileged to have access to Jacob Lawrence's personal photo album and his studio chair that's in the photograph, in the installation, and his record collection that was also in the archive in Seattle. In the permission, I was able to reproduce a series of photos taken from the photo albums to make a wallpaper. And from those images, I painted one of the photographs of Jacob at his table having a coffee, probably in the morning. And so I remade an image that was from a photographic image that I included in the installation with this ladder that also was a collage of photographic images leading up to the painting. And under the ladder was a portable record player that played the records that was his favorite. And one of the records that he really enjoyed was Sweet Honey in the Rock. This access I was given was from Barbara Earl Thomas, who is an artist in Seattle, but also she was the founder of the African American Museum that's in Seattle. So she actually had the archive stored there and allowed me permission to use the images for this wallpaper that traveled first from Peabody Essex, then to Seattle Art Museum, and then it ended at the Phillips in DC.
Brilliant, brilliant, brilliant. So we only have a few more images, and we're down to our final, say, 15 minutes for the talk. So, thank you for being so generous with your time, Derrick. So we'll make it through the next couple of slides.
Oh, no problem. I mean, we always enjoy having a conversation, so this is easy.
So I got to see this in person. If I'm not mistaken, maybe 2 years ago. Is that right?
I think it was like, yeah, maybe 2018, 19.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the last year has thrown off everyone's calendar. I mean, I could be.
Yeah. Totally. So this image.
You could talk a little bit about this work.
Yeah, so this image was the beginning of a great relationship with both Salon 94 and Luxembourg and Diane. And now I'm still working with Salon 94 and Amalia from Luxembourg and Diane on a new gallery endeavor representation. But this was the first invitation I was asked to create a piece, create a show in the Luxembourg and Diane space, Upper East Side. And I was open to do whatever I wanted. And so I was really interested in including some of my previous or new works, but part of an ongoing series of these kind of profile portraits. But I had already created these portraits, previously, and I was kind of like, moving on. And I thought, if I was to do something like this, I would want to create something that's more of an experience, because installation has always been my passion as an artist, because I ran a gallery. And running a gallery, you become way more aware of space and the way that people engage with spaces. And so I had the opportunity to kind of like transform the space. So I designed these wallpapers that went on the wall. And as you see, the wood floor is actually the floor of the gallery. It looks like it's part of a graphic. But I created these backdrops that look like interior spaces where I included frameworks on the wall throughout the 4 floors of the gallery. And So each floor had a very different aesthetic that hinted at this idea of like the Black American middle class interior.
So what I'm seeing here is, so the background is applied directly to the wall, but the framed works are the actual artworks that are on top of the background.
Yeah, it's so trippy when you look at it online because it really looks like it's totally different. It doesn't have that kind of like, you can't see the kind of dimensionality of things on top, which to me makes that perfect picture. But I'm thinking, you know, the idea that the wallpaper, the bed, the lamps, everything in the space besides the two frame, and each space there was always 2 or 3 works that were framed on the wall. And that's how you kind of distinguish the difference between the backdrop and the works on the wall. So these particular, these 2 collage paintings were above the bed of this wallpaper room.
Great. So I think we're coming down to the last couple of images. So these are really, really striking works. And I think I saw one of these the first time from this series at an art fair, again, a couple of years ago. But what brought you to this body of work?
So the beauty world, which I call this series, kind of started. I'm always working on like multiple works at the same time, like because I'm always looking for references, researching things, photographing things. And so this particular series came about because I live on a borderline between Crown Heights and Bed-Stuy, and I get off on the Nostrand stop, and I walk down Fulton where there's a lot of beauty supply shops. And I'm so excited because they always change them up. And I started photographing them at night, during the day, when they change the window. I just started collecting hundreds of images of just beauty shop windows. And it wasn't for any particular reason, not for a body of work. And I kind of start off like that all the time with my practice. I don't really create a body of work for a show or anything. I kind of look at it as like an ongoing exercise. Like I start taking photographs. I don't know what I'm going to do with the photographs, but I just look at them on my phone when I have downtime, thinking about, how, why did I take them? What do they mean to me? What am I interested in? Why am I interested in it? What about it I'm interested in? And then I come to kind of a place where I start thinking about, can these works actually inspire a body of work, these photographic images? And so I really started thinking about how this work kind of applies to my studio practice. And so I started thinking about these beauty supply shops as kind of like my muse. And I decided to take a photographic image shot in the studio of a mannequin head that I purchased as kind of like the main form to use over and over again, and to paint over it with, by referencing all of the photographic images that I had taken. So most, if not all, of the images that I use in the studio that I'm painting are taking, or at least inspired by, photographic images that I've taken of beauty shop windows. So a lot of the hairstyles are actually from photographic images that I've either seen or photographed either in New York or Baltimore or down south or in Paris or other places I've traveled. I try to document at least one area where I see the beauty supply shops, which are primarily in Black neighborhoods. And they always have such extravagant displays of whatever the latest style. And to me, that's fascinating because I feel like those shops are really like a street gallery, and you really get a sense of like what the taste is right now, what people are interested in, or at least what the manufacturer believes that the customer may want. And so to me, that became such a motivating part of developing this work. And it really became like this fun exercise of combining like this hard edge abstraction, which I'm such a big fan and a student of in my undergrad years at Pratt, mixed with like this very familiar image that's representative of the Black female form.
Right.
And also with these images, I I manipulated the skin tones because the skin tone in the original photographic mannequin head was very much a very off color that did not really relate to the human skin tone. So I decided to kind of paint over the mannequin head, leaving only accents to reveal that it's like a not a natural form, but the idea that it has this presence of the Black female form or a Black female identified form that I became very interested in because it was very particular that it was not a white mannequin form necessarily. It was very much appealing to the Black consumer. And what does that mean? And so that drove me into making this body of work.
So the final two images we'll look at are from a different body of work. And I would love to hear about these paintings.
Well, this is from the series called the Family Portrait Series. And this actual image right here is one of the only images from the Family Portrait Series that was mostly from imagination. This particular painting of the barbecue scene was not an image that I actually had in my photographic, composite of images from family photos, but I wanted to make it happen. And I wanted to convey the sense of, I had one uncle who passed, but he was the uncle who was always manning the grill. He was the youngest uncle. He was the one who was the most relatable out of all the older people there, but he was the one who knew how to do everything. He knew how to fix stuff. He knew how to man things. He was the guy that we looked to as being like this leader and like family activity. So I wanted to make a painting that kind of paid homage to him in some way, but also I wanted to fit into the scheme of what I was trying to convey with the kind of the historical representation of family in my paintings, in the way that I, am very interested in composition, very interested in like formal execution, but I also wanted to kind of talk about family in a particular way.
And this is our final image. And I think that what you just said kind of encapsulates the spirit behind this as well. But is this an image taken from a family photo?
Yeah, this is actually from a family photo. And I became really interested in this image of my aunt and my cousins in this painting because this also is a representation of the architecture in Baltimore. And a lot of the cityscapes, the neighborhoods have this very particular sunroom architecture added to the layout of the home, the houses there. And just can give you a sense of how Baltimore, for me, is this type of Baltimore. When you think about Baltimore on a cinematic level, from what we've been shown, it's always a very traumatic, very depressed city. But for me, this image is kind of representation of how I associate my experience with Baltimore. This is kind of like the life and the experience I've had growing up in Baltimore and my family in the city of Baltimore. So I really wanted to talk about that with my work in this particular series, because my experience in Baltimore was not very traumatic. I didn't have the experience that I see in movies and things that I see that talks about a certain kind of like very like intense, almost like just jarring, almost like, oh my God, like how could they live like those things? To me has always been something that is more about what people see on movies like The Wire or different things like that, which is another part of Baltimore, so I'm not saying it's not Baltimore, but for me, my Baltimore is a very, like, I can say boring, where people are just going to work. My family work for the Social Security department. They work for the unemployment insurance. They work for the postal service. They have office jobs. They work in accounting. Like, that's my family's day to day. So for us, it's more like barbecues and like going to church and those things. So for me, I find value in representing that in art. So my focus is really more about capturing that very normative, maybe boring, maybe traditional, but to me, I want to make it common.
Right.
More so than the images that I've seen that are being considered common, representations of Baltimore City.
We have a question that's come in from one of the attendees. Hi, Derrick. I wanted to ask you what the hardships you experienced prior to and when you entered art school, as well as the emotions you felt in your first ever solo exhibition. Okay, so kind of a two-part question. The first part of the question is about any like hardships you might have experienced prior to and during art school. So was art school difficult? Was there any sort of like?
Yeah, of course. Art school is very difficult. I mean, you're picking a career that has no guarantee. It's like a writer. You go to school to be a writer, does not mean you're going to get published as a writer. It doesn't mean that you're going to become a very famous, director or movie. You're really just going to school to kind of develop your craft as a creative person. The odds are of you being successful in a way that is monetarily successful are very rare. It is what it is. Like art is, to me, is the least profession to go in if you want to have a guarantee. Like going into art, for me as an artist, I knew I wasn't going to be I thought I would be making money as an artist. So I thought about other ways of making money that would allow me to keep making art. So I thought, when I was at Pratt, I changed my major from painting to art education, because I said that I could teach while I make my paintings, because I want my paintings to be my paintings. I don't want to make paintings because I have a gallery and the gallery wants to sell art and I need to make money. To me, that's not what making art is about. Making art is about having an idea and experimenting with the idea and trying it out and testing it out for a long period of time. And maybe, just maybe, those works may be good enough to show. Not the idea that now I have a gallery, I have to make work to sell it so I can pay my rent. Because right. Honestly, I don't think a lot of good work comes from that. So, but that's the kind of place that we're in right now when you think about art. But for me, being an artist was never about making money. Like even today, I'm still surprised that I'm making money off of what I'm doing, because that's never my intention when I'm in my studio doing stuff. I'm always thinking about like tinkering around and thinking about experimenting, and I still teach. I'm at Brooklyn College. I'm a tenure track professor there. I don't have to teach financially, but I feel like I like to have a practical foundation in my life to know that maybe I might want to just start, maybe do something that is unpredictable in my career as an artist. Maybe I want to do like little scraps of like little paper and, something that's so unfamiliar to what people see in my practice. And maybe it might not be monetarily supported. Maybe I might not sell art. Right. The idea of selling art could go up and down. So for me, teaching gives me a certain sense of confidence that I can make what I want always, because I know I'm going to get paid for doing a job that requires helping other people understand the importance of art.
Well, the other part of this question, and this would be a good note to end on, if you can think back to your first solo exhibition. I don't even know what that was, your first solo exhibition, but how did that feel? Can you think back to that?
Well, I had a great experience because I had my first solo exhibition in 2005.
Okay.
Before, with Jack Tilton Gallery when it was in Soho. And at that particular time, I had just graduated from Columbia. I was making like a lot of experimental. I was making costumes and video and performance and sculpture. So I was kind of like just really testing and seeing like what my interests was at the time. And I remember Jack, who was a really prominent collector. He passed not too long ago, but a lot of major artists show with Tilton Gallery. And I was so honored to be invited to have a show and to be represented by the gallery. And one of the things that Jack told me before I even had a show, he said, listen, I want to do a solo show with you, but I'm just letting you know, we might not sell anything. We might not sell any work. I was letting you know. And I was like, really? And he said, yeah. He said, but I'm showing you because I believe in your work. And I think that you're a good artist, but we might not sell any work. He said, but if someone wants to buy your work and and they want a really good deal at having your work, then I hope you're okay with that, because I'm going to put it in someone's hands who's a really important collector who will be supportive and will, preserve their work. So I'm gonna let you know that, but we may not sell anything.
Right.
That he said a lot of times I sell work in the back of the gallery that's secondary to allow me to experiment and have artists like yourself make work that I think is important work, but they may not necessarily be financially supported from the community outside of the gallery. Wow. So I was fortunate to have a gallery to tell me like, you might not sell anything. Do you still want to have a show?
Right.
And
Right.
that lesson really kind of set me in a place where I am now as an artist, to not really expect a big outcome from having a show, because you might not have one.
Right.
You know?
Right. Right.
You might
Yeah.
not.
Well, thanks. Thank you for that. And I think that actually kind of set the tone for maybe for like how you perceive shows moving forward, right? Going into them knowing
Yeah.
that there's always the possibility that it's a great show and no one buys anything. We
The
have
gallery,
time.
the gallery is always more happy when they sell stuff than me, because I'm always like, oh, really? You know, like we sold a lot of work. I'm like, oh, wow, okay. You know, because, you know, it's a community, it's a collaboration when you work with other people.
Right.
But me as an artist, you know, I have a job teaching, so I get a direct deposit every 2 weeks. So at least I
Look,
get a paycheck, you know.
I want to honor your time. We're gonna. There's one more question, and then we're gonna wrap up our conversation. So, the question is, Derrick, could you talk about what guides or determines your choice of mediums or materials? This person says that they first encountered your booth at Frieze, New York in 2019, and it was hard to tell if they were collages or made with paint. So they're curious about what guides or determines your choice of medium or materials.
Well, for me, I'm not a person, I like the idea of process in my development of my work, but I'm less interested in the viewer seeing that process is the major driver of my work. I believe in like seamless application. You know, the process might be long and it might be labor intensive and it might have a lot of different components to think about when you think about paint and collage and different things like that. But for me, I like when it fuses together to create a complete image. And the idea of it being collage or painting or sculpture is something that's open for discussion, something that becomes this kind of like exploration of about material and what material can do and what, you know, how can it camouflage? Is it about embellishment? Is it about layering? Those things are really interesting to me to pose as an artist. But sometimes I think that it's really important not necessarily to be as obvious in what you're looking at when you look at certain things. You know, for me, it's really more about what the work is, the kind of like the psychological impact of the engagement of the art. How does it make you feel? How does it make you feel? Am I successful in the way that I'm communicating the idea of leisure? Am I successful in the way that I'm communicating the idea of Black adornment and cosmetic culture? Like I'm more interested in that. Like, is that coming through strong? Am I being clear in that, in the way I feel about Black culture and my culture? And, you know, the way I'm trying to talk about the empowerment of Black culture and the commerce that's involved in Black identity and identity overall in America. Like, I'm more interested in that as part of my work. But the material part is very much the feature of the work. But the application of it, for me, is about merging together seamlessly. So the idea of what came first is not easily determined.
Right.
But I like all types of material. The materials are so essential. Collage is important to me because it's about using material that have its own embedded history and ideologies that I fuse onto things that are about painting and things that are about photographic imagery merged together. So I'm thinking about all these different histories about seeing and looking and understanding occupying one surface.
Thank you so much. I mean, we've gone over, of course, there's always like one last question. So maybe we can answer this with 2 sentences, because I think you touched on it before, but I think it's an important question. It's basically, what's the most important advice you can give to a young artist? Like, if there was one piece of advice.
Don't look at Instagram as a gauge successful artist in your peer group.
Awesome.
And, yeah, because you're not gonna get that's camouflage.
That's a great observation.
Make work every day like you're gonna have a show, even if you're not having a show. Make a show in your head in reality. You know, that's important. Elizabeth Catlett told me that. I met Elizabeth Catlett and she told me, I asked her, what would be some advice for a young artist? And she said, make work every day. And that's what I did.
On that note, Derrick, thank you so much for today, man. This has been a great conversation. And I hope everyone that joined us, you know, gained a lot from this. This is recorded. It'll be available on New York Academy of Art's website. Derrick, I'll be in touch with you separately. I always appreciate your time and your generosity and your insight, man. And I'm
Thank
so
you,
happy to call you a friend. Thank you.
Same. Thank you. Later.
Bye-bye.